The first thing the hegemony noticed about Earth's answer was that it did not look like fear. It did not look like courage either. It was just a file. No ceremonial language. No list of demands. No military warning wrapped in diplomatic polish. The message crossed the black between Earth's outer defense satellites and the forward command vessel of the hegemony fleet, passed through 11 layers of alien encryption, and opened on analyst Maretha's screen with a title so plain it felt like an insult. Negotiator designation, Solomon Voss, authorized representative of Earth. Mareth stared at it for 3 silent seconds, waiting for the rest of the transmission to unpack. Nothing followed. Around her, the intelligence deck continued its low mechanical breathing. Translation engines pulsed in the walls. Tactical projections showed Earth rotating beneath a web of red approach vectors. 400 conquest banners glowed along the upper display, each one marking a civilization that had received the same ultimatum and broken before the 30th day. Earth had answered in 6 hours. With one old man's name. Mareth leaned closer. The hegemony's standard protocol was not complicated. Arrive with overwhelming force. Announce the terms. Offer a narrow path to survival. Let the target species exhaust itself on panic, politics, or pride. In 2 centuries, the pattern had remained reliable enough to become almost boring. Some fought. Some surrendered. Some begged so quickly the generals lost respect before the first treaty seal cooled. None sent a personnel file. Mareth touched the command glyph. The file opened. Solomon Voss appeared in a still image taken 23 Earth years earlier. Human male. Seamed brown skin. Gray at the temples. Deep-set eyes that did not try to look powerful. No uniform. No decorations. No visible weapon. He was standing beside a collapsed building with one hand resting on the shoulder of a child whose face had been blurred by 4 separate privacy codes. Mareth frowned at the redactions. Most species hid weapons. Humans were hiding grief. She scrolled. Age, 71. Status, retired. Primary service record. Humanitarian field operations, disaster negotiations, civilian evacuation coordination. Secondary classification, restricted. Maretha's upper hands paused above the console. Restricted by whom? She expanded the file. 4 separate Earth governments had sealed portions of the same man's record. Not allied governments. Not always friendly governments. States that intelligence summaries said had threatened one another across oceans, borders, and ideologies had all agreed on one thing. They did not want the galaxy reading Solomon Voss too clearly. Maretha's throat plates tightened. She kept scrolling. Former child combatant. Humanitarian worker in 6 collapsed states. Classified United Nations negotiator. 61 documented negotiations. 61 favorable outcomes for Earth. Mareth checked the translation. Favorable did not mean victory. Not exactly. The word carried softer edges in human language. It meant the result had preserved Earth's core interest while leaving the other party alive enough to sign the paperwork. That made it worse. The dead could not be embarrassed. The living remembered who moved them. She opened the incident notes. 3 conflicts prevented. No combat record attached. No confirmed coercive leverage listed. No verifiable bribe trail. No blackmail archive. No assassination linkage. No weapon discharge recorded. Mareth stopped. The final line sat alone at the bottom of the dossier, clean and absurd. Subject has never discharged a weapon in his life. For a long moment she did not move. Then she ran the file through fraud detection. No anomalies. She ran it through psychological threat classification. The engine hesitated. That was impossible. Hegemony intelligence engines did not hesitate. They sorted monarchs, generals, prophets, insurgents, cult leaders, economic saboteurs, and planetary diplomats into neat columns before a junior officer finished breathing. But Solomon Voss sat on the screen like a stone in a machine. Unclassified. Mareth requested comparative records. The system searched across 400 conquered civilizations, 200 years of negotiations, surrender talks, hostage exchanges, rebellion settlements, fleet armistices, border collapses, and royal capitulations. A result returned. No known successful negotiation against subject. Mareth read it twice. Then a 3rd time. Across the deck, Junior Officer Vorik noticed her stillness. Problem? He asked. Mareth did not answer immediately. Vorik was young enough to still enjoy certainty. His armor plates had not yet dulled from long campaigns. His eyes stayed bright in the presence of conquest banners. He had been born after the hegemony's 100th victory, raised on the assumption that all resistance was only a temporary failure to understand arithmetic. Mareth almost envied him. She copied the file, attached her finding, and sent it to Supreme General Drathan. Her note contained 1 sentence. I cannot find a single record of anyone successfully negotiating against him. The reply came 31 seconds later. Bring him. No question. No concern. No curiosity. Mareth looked back at Solomon's image. The old human did not stare through the camera. He seemed to be looking past whoever had taken the photograph, toward something broken just outside the frame. 6 hours after the hegemony demanded Earth's submission, Earth had not sent a fleet. It had sent a man everyone on his own planet had learned to redact. Solomon Voss arrived without music. No honor escort crossed the docking bridge. No diplomatic guard formed beside the airlock. No armored human delegation waited behind him with solemn faces and hidden transmitters. The hatch opened, pressure equalized, and an old man stepped into the neutral station carrying a worn leather satchel in one hand and a steel thermos in the other. Mareth watched through the observation feed. For the first time since the Earth file arrived, the intelligence deck fell completely quiet. Solomon paused just inside the corridor, not because he was afraid but because he seemed to be studying the station's breathing. The lights. The seams. The faint tremor of gravity fields that kept alien metal pretending to be floor. He adjusted the strap of his satchel on his shoulder and began walking toward the negotiation chamber with the slow economy of someone who had learned never to waste motion in dangerous places. Vorik stood behind Mareth, arms folded. That is him. Mareth did not look away from the feed. Yes. He looks breakable. On the screen, Solomon passed 2 hegemony guards twice his height. Their weapons tracked him without rising. His eyes moved to the rifles once, then to the soldiers holding them. He gave neither the dignity of reaction. Vorik clicked softly in amusement. That cannot be the source of command concern. Mareth enlarged the image until Solomon's face filled the projection. There was no challenge in it. No hatred. No theatrical calm. Only an exhausted attentiveness, as if he had entered the room already aware of every possible cruelty and found none of them original. That is what concerns me, Mareth said. Vorik waited for more. Mareth gave him nothing. Inside the negotiation chamber, Supreme General Drathan stood at the head of the black table with 6 senior officers behind him. The chamber had been designed by neutral architects, but the hegemony had already made it feel conquered. Their banners hung along one wall. Their fleet map filled the glass above the table. Earth was centered beneath the shadow of 209 capital ships. A lesser species would have looked at the map first. Solomon looked at the chairs. Which one is mine? He asked. Drathan's mandibles tightened slightly. The small one. Solomon nodded, crossed the room and sat down. He placed the satchel beside his feet. Set the thermos on the table. Removed a paper folder, a pen and a pair of reading glasses. The objects looked fragile under the chamber lights. Almost ridiculous beside the hard geometry of hegemony command armor. Then he looked at Drathan. Not up at him. Not down. At him. You've done this 400 times, Solomon said. You're clearly efficient. So why does it always take this long? Drathan did not answer. For the first time in the chamber's recorded use, the opening statement belonged to the conquered party. Mareth saw it happen in Drathan's shoulders. A pause too brief for the officers behind him to name but long enough for the cameras to catch. The general had prepared for defiance, pleading, bargaining, perhaps some primitive moral sermon about sovereignty. He had not prepared to be asked why his empire was slow. Drathan lowered himself into his chair. Because lesser civilizations require time to accept reality. Solomon wrote something down. The sound of the pen was small. What are you recording? Drathan asked. Your answer. It was not a concession. No, Solomon said. It was better. Vorik leaned toward the observation feed. What does that mean? Maretha's fingers moved across her console, tagging the exchange. It means the general gave him a premise. Drathan began the formal surrender terms. He spoke with the polished boredom of repetition. Earth would transfer orbital authority within 72 hours. All military installations would submit to hegemony inspection. Resource extraction rights would be ceded under imperial supervision. Human leadership would remain symbolic for a transitional period, provided no resistance cells formed. Cultural institutions would be preserved unless they interfered with compliance. Solomon listened. He did not interrupt once. He took notes through the sections on fleet occupation, planetary administration, civilian disarmament and punishment schedules. Once, he removed his glasses and wiped them with a folded cloth. Once, he opened the thermos, poured tea into the cap, and let the steam rise between him and the general's conquest map. The longer he stayed silent, the more the room changed. Drathan's officers began glancing at the notes. Mareth zoomed in but the angle was wrong. She could see only fragments of handwriting, thin dark marks arranged with deliberate care. Vorik exhaled. Why is he not objecting? Mareth watched Solomon underline one line. Because objection would tell us where he is vulnerable. Drathan reached the end of the terms. These conditions are non-negotiable. Solomon finished writing before looking up. I understand. Drayton waited. The room waited with him. Solomon closed the folder. I'll need 48 hours to consult my government. A senior officer gave a sharp sound of disbelief. Drayton's eyes narrowed. You have no authority to delay imperial procedure. Solomon placed his pen neatly on top of the folder. Then reject the request. No one moved. The sentence was not defiant. That was the problem. It was an unlocked door placed in the center of the room, and everyone present understood that walking through it might reveal why Earth had sent him alone. Drayton held Solomon's gaze. Then he said, 48 hours. Solomon stood, collected his thermos and satchel, and walked out without asking for escort. Mareth followed him on the feed until the airlock swallowed him. Only after the hatch sealed did Vorik speak. We gave him time. Mareth stared at the empty corridor. No, she said. He made us choose to give it. For 48 hours the old human was not in the room. That made him worse. Drayton ordered the station sealed to all non-essential traffic, then pretended the decision had nothing to do with Solomon Voss. Patrols doubled along the docking spine. Encryption filters tightened around every Earth transmission. The negotiation chamber was scrubbed twice, not because it was contaminated, but because the general disliked the sight of the chair where the human had sat too comfortably. Mareth watched all of it happen from the intelligence deck. No one called it fear. The hegemony had 100 cleaner words for fear when it appeared among officers. Caution. Procedure. Threat hygiene. Strategic patience. Operational discipline. The Empire had conquered 400 civilizations partly because it understood that language could make trembling hands look like policy. Still, the hands trembled. Not Drayton's. Not visibly. But one communications officer requested a second verification on all Earth signals. A weapons controller asked whether the human thermos had been scanned for biological agents. A senior adjutant quietly reviewed the station's evacuation routes, then deleted the search history when he noticed Mareth watching. Solomon Voss had left them nothing. So they began filling the silence themselves. Mareth opened his file again. Then she opened the sealed fragments she was not supposed to access. It took 11 minutes to break the first government lock. 16 for the second. The third resisted long enough that Vorik drifted behind her station and noticed the unauthorized trace burning across her display. You are violating archive restrictions, he said. Yes. Can you do that? I am doing it. Vorik looked around as if expecting a punishment drone to descend from the ceiling. Mareth did not slow down. The first redacted record came from a border war 40 years earlier. 2 human nations had mobilized nuclear delivery systems after a naval strike killed hundreds. Intelligence projections gave the conflict an 82% chance of becoming continental within 12 hours. Solomon Voss entered a private room with both command delegations. No transcript survived. No recording survived. The war ended before sunrise. Mareth searched for leverage. Military pressure. Financial collapse. Assassination threat. Hostage exchange. Anything that made the outcome fit inside familiar categories. There was nothing. Only one surviving note from a translator assigned outside the room. He asked both sides what they wanted their grandchildren to inherit. Vorik read over her shoulder. That stopped a war? Mareth did not answer. She opened the second record. A famine corridor. 6 militias. 30,000 civilians trapped between artillery lines. 3 previous envoys executed. Solomon crossed the checkpoint unarmed, carrying medical manifests and a list of children who had already died waiting for permission to eat. The militias opened the road 4 hours later. One warlord later claimed Voss had threatened him. But when investigators asked what the threat was, the man refused to repeat it. He simply stared at the floor until the interview ended. Vorik shifted uneasily. The third record was worse because it was cleaner. A hostage crisis inside an embassy. 32 captives. 1 radical commander with explosives wired to the doors. Solomon spoke through a wall for 9 hours. At hour 10 the commander released the children. At hour 11 the wounded. At hour 12, everyone else. Then he surrendered his detonator to Solomon personally. Mareth found the final line in the incident report. The commander apologized to him before he cried. Vorik's voice was quieter now. What did Voss say? The recording is missing. Convenient. No, Mareth said. Consistent. She leaned back, feeling the shape of something she still could not name. The hegemony broke enemies by showing them the cost of resistance. Solomon seemed to break people by making them look directly at the cost of themselves. That was not diplomacy as the Empire understood it. That was a mirror sharpened into a blade. Drayton entered the intelligence deck without announcement. Every officer straightened. Mareth closed none of the files. It would have insulted him to pretend. The general stopped behind her. You found something. Several things. Is he an assassin? No. A commander? No. A religious figure? No. Then name the threat. Mareth looked at Solomon's old photograph again. I cannot. Drayton's silence hardened. That is not an answer. It is the most accurate one I have. Vorik made the mistake of speaking. Supreme General, with respect, he is one unarmed human. Perhaps the reason we cannot classify him is because there is nothing to classify. Drayton turned slightly. Vorik stopped breathing. But the general did not rebuke him. He looked back at the file instead, and that restraint disturbed Mareth more than anger would have. 400 civilizations, Drayton said. Kings lied. Prophets wept. Generals threatened. Children were placed before cameras to manufacture pity. Every species believed it had discovered a unique path through us. He tapped Solomon's image with one claw. This one sensed silence, asked one question, and made my officers study chairs. No one answered. Drayton straightened. When he returns, we do not follow his rhythm. We set terms. We force response. We extract motive. And if he refuses? Mareth asked. Drayton's eyes narrowed. Then we learn what Earth values by threatening to remove it. Mareth felt the deck grow colder around her. On the outer display, Earth turned beneath the fleet, blue and white and unaware of how many weapons had begun to consider it again. Vorik looked at the planet, then at Solomon's file. For the first time since the ultimatum, he did not look amused. Solomon Voss returned at the 48th hour with one sheet of paper. Not a treaty packet. Not a counterproposal. One sheet. Mareth saw it in his hand before the chamber doors opened, and something inside her tightened. The paper was white, unmarked from the distance, held between two fingers as if it weighed nothing. He had brought the same satchel, the same steel thermos, the same slow walk that made armed guards feel decorative. Drayton was already seated when Solomon entered. That was the first change. On the first day, the general had stood at the head of the table and made the room rise around him. Now he waited in his chair beneath the conquest map, surrounded by officers who had been ordered not to react. Solomon noticed. He did not smile. That made it worse. He crossed to his chair, sat down, placed the thermos beside him, and laid the single sheet face down on the table. Drayton watched the paper. You requested consultation, the general said. You have had it. I did. Then speak Earth's position. Solomon turned the sheet over and slid it across the black table. The movement was gentle. The effect was not. Drayton looked down. For several seconds he did not touch it. Then he lifted the paper and read the only sentence printed on it. Earth is prepared to allow this negotiation to end peacefully. The room became very still. Mareth felt Vorik lean closer to the observation feed beside her. On the chamber display, Drayton's face did not change, but his lower hand curled against the table edge. He read the sentence again. Then a third time. This is not an offer, Drayton said. Solomon folded his hands. No. This is not a counterterm. No. This is nothing. Solomon nodded once. I know. Drayton lowered the page. Solomon held his gaze. I wanted to see how you would respond to nothing. No officer moved. Even the station's ventilation seemed to thin. Maretha's fingers hovered above the console, but she did not tag the moment. There was no category for it. The old human had returned after 2 days and handed the Empire an empty shape. Not empty because he lacked substance. Empty because he wanted to measure what the hegemony would pour into it. Drayton placed the paper flat on the table. You waste Imperial time. No, Solomon said. I bought enough of it to learn the room. Drayton's eyes sharpened. The room? Your officers look at you before they look at Earth. Your analyst watches me more closely than your weapons map. Your junior officer believes this should already be over, but he stopped believing that as confidently sometime yesterday. And you sat before I entered. Vorik went rigid behind the glass. Mareth did not look at him. In the chamber, Drayton's officers stiffened one by one, as if each had been touched by a blade too fine to see. Solomon continued softly. That told me something. Drayton leaned forward. And what did it tell you? That you've been afraid since you opened my file. The words landed without force. That was why they entered so deeply. Drayton's hand struck the table. The sound cracked through the speakers. Officers behind him shifted toward their weapons, but Solomon did not flinch. He did not blink quickly. He did not even look at the hands moving near holsters. He looked only at Drayton. Mareth stopped breathing. Drayton's voice lowered. You mistake discipline for fear. Often, Solomon said. But not today. The general rose slowly. Your species is alive because I have permitted this procedure. Solomon picked up his pen and wrote something in the margin of his folder. Drayton saw it. His mandibles spread. Stop writing. Solomon finished the sentence. Then he capped the pen. Go on. A senior officer made a sound low in his throat. Drathan stepped around the table. Each footfall carried the weight of campaigns that had erased royal houses, planetary flags, languages that now existed only as museum data under hegemony supervision. He stopped beside Solomon's chair, towering over him. Earth has 40 billion civilian bodies under my firing lanes. Solomon looked up at him. That number is wrong. Drathan paused. For the first time, Solomon corrected him. Your census is counting orbital workers twice and missing 8 million off-world miners and transit colonies. If you intend to use civilian life as arithmetic, at least do the arithmetic properly. Maretha's blood went cold. Vorik whispered, he knows our scan error. Drathan's shadow fell across Solomon's face. You think numbers protect you? No. Then what protects Earth? Solomon's hand moved to the thermos. He did not open it. He simply rested his fingers against the steel. At the moment, your uncertainty. Drathan bent closer. I can end that uncertainty. Yes, Solomon said. That is the risk. The room tightened around the sentence. Drathan did not understand it immediately. None of them did. Then Mareth saw it begin to move through the officers behind him. If the hegemony attacked, it would finally learn what Earth had prepared. But learning required crossing the line Solomon had spent 2 days making them afraid to touch. Drathan's voice became almost quiet. You came here to threaten me with absence. Solomon looked at the conquest map above them, at the red vectors holding Earth inside a cage of light. No. I came here to learn whether your empire could still recognize a door before it became a wall. For 1 second, Drathan's face showed nothing. Then his lower hand closed into a fist. Solomon saw it. Mareth saw Solomon see it. And she understood, too late, that the real negotiation had not begun when he entered the room. It had begun when the general decided he needed to prove he was not afraid. Drathan made the mistake because Solomon left him no clean victory. Not in the room. Not in front of his officers. Not beneath the conquest map where Earth glowed like prey and still refused to behave like it. The general stood beside Solomon's chair, close enough that every camera caught the difference between them. Armor beside cloth. Claws beside a paper folder. 2 centuries of conquest beside one old human with tea cooling in a steel cap. And still, the room had turned toward Solomon. Drathan felt it. That was the wound. You speak of doors, Drathan said, because you believe this chamber protects you. Solomon looked up slowly. No. Then perhaps you believe your age protects you. No. Your reputation? No. Drathan leaned closer until his shadow covered the folder, the paper, the thermos, and Solomon's hands. Then understand this clearly. I can have you removed from this chair, opened, studied, and returned to Earth in pieces before your government finishes preparing its next encrypted file. The officers behind Drathan went still. Vorik stopped moving completely. Mareth felt her fingers curl against the console. Not because the threat shocked her. Hegemony commanders had said worse things to kings, priests, and surrender councils. Threat was the empire's oldest language. But Solomon heard it like a man recognizing a badly pronounced word. He did not answer at first. He looked at Drathan's face. Not at the mandibles. Not at the claws. Not at the weapons near the wall. At the face beneath the empire. Then he set the thermos down. The sound was small. It cut through the chamber harder than Drathan's fist had. Solomon removed his glasses, folded them, and placed them on the table beside the single sentence Earth had sent back. When he spoke, the voice was quieter than before. I was 9 years old the first time someone pointed a weapon at me and told me my life was in their hands. No one interrupted. His rifle was taller than I was. He smelled like smoke and spoiled grain. His fingers shook on the trigger because he was more frightened than I was, though I did not understand that until years later. Drathan did not move. Solomon's eyes stayed on him. He told me to kneel. The chamber seemed to shrink around the words. I remember the mud. Not the politics. Not the flag. Not the cause he claimed he served. Just the mud. Cold through the cloth at my knees. A fly on his cheek. A boy behind him crying so quietly he thought no one heard. Maretha's throat plates tightened. This was not a plea. That made it dangerous. Solomon continued. Since then I have sat across from warlords, commanders, ministers, revolutionaries, intelligence chiefs, and men who had already decided to kill me before I entered the room. He leaned forward by the smallest degree. I need you to think carefully about what you believe a threat feels like to someone like me. Full silence. Not diplomatic silence. Not tactical silence. The kind that arrives when everyone in a room realizes a weapon has been drawn, but no one can see whose hand holds it. Drathan's mandibles closed. For the first time since Solomon had entered the station, the general had no immediate sentence ready. That was the break. Tiny. Almost invisible. But Mareth saw it. Vorik saw it too. His young certainty had drained into something harder and less comfortable. He was watching Solomon now with the expression of an officer realizing that weakness and softness were not the same species of thing. Solomon put his glasses back on. Now, he said, would you like to tell me what you actually want or shall I leave again? Drayton's lower hand twitched. The old human had given him two choices, and both were humiliations. If Drayton answered, he accepted that the previous terms were theater. If he refused, Solomon would leave, and every officer would know the Empire had spent 2 days preparing for an old man only to be abandoned by him again. Drayton returned to his chair. No one breathed too loudly while he walked. He sat. Mareth marked the moment. Not as surrender. As fracture. Drayton looked at the paper again. Earth is prepared to allow this negotiation to end peacefully. For the first time the sentence did not look empty. It looked like a hand resting beside a locked box. What Earth wants is obvious, Drayton said. Solomon shook his head. Earth is not the question. Drayton's eyes narrowed. Solomon tapped the folder once. You did not bring 209 capital ships to Earth's orbit because you needed minerals. Your empire already has minerals. You did not conquer 400 civilizations because you lacked labor. You have more labor than your bureaucracy can digest. You did not send me your surrender terms because you believed I would sign them. Drayton said nothing. Solomon's voice remained level. You came because every empire that grows too large eventually needs proof that it is still moving. Mareth felt the sentence enter the deck like cold air. Solomon turned one page in his folder. You do not want Earth. Not first. You want Earth to confirm that the old method still works. Drayton's gaze hardened. And if it does? Solomon looked at him for a long moment. Then you would not still be asking. Behind the glass, Vorik whispered something too low for translation. Mareth did not need the machine. She knew what he had said. He is reading him. Inside the chamber, Solomon closed the folder again. The problem, General, is that you have mistaken repetition for certainty. 400 times you arrived, threatened, waited, and watched someone become predictable. He glanced toward the conquest banners. Then Earth sent someone whose only job is to make predictable men uncomfortable. Drayton's officers did not look at their general. That was worse than if they had. Solomon reached for the single sheet, turned it around, and slid it back toward himself. Now we can begin. Drayton stared at the empty table between them. For the first time in 200 years of conquest, the hegemony had to decide what it wanted after intimidation failed. The first concession did not sound like one. Drayton did not offer retreat. He did not soften the occupation terms. He did not remove a single capital ship from Earth's sky. He only asked one question. What guarantee does Earth offer? Solomon looked at him across the table. Against what? Drayton's upper hand tightened around the edge of the paper. Against future resistance. Solomon let the silence sit long enough for the general to hear himself. Then he said, none. The officers behind Drayton shifted. Vorik whispered, none? Mareth did not answer. Her eyes stayed on Solomon. The old human had not refused because he lacked an answer. He had refused because the premise itself was bait, and he was showing the Empire exactly where it had placed the hook. Drayton's voice sharpened. You expect us to leave your system with no guarantee? No, Solomon said. I expect you to decide whether a guarantee from a species you intended to enslave would mean anything. The chamber swallowed the sentence. Drayton stared at him. Solomon opened his folder and slid out a second document. This one was not blank. It contained no treaty language either. Just a sequence of dates, invasion records, surrender statistics, rebellion costs, resettlement failures, food collapses, garrison casualties, administrative debt, and fleet deployment strain across 200 years of hegemony expansion. Mareth zoomed in. Her stomach sank. Those were internal numbers. Not all of them. Enough. Vorik leaned closer to the display. Where did he get that? Maretha's hands moved before she realized it, searching for breached signatures, failed archives, intercepted couriers. The console returned nothing useful. Inside the chamber, Drayton's face had become unreadable. Solomon tapped one line with his pen. Your last 47 conquests have cost more than the previous 112 combined. No officer behind Drayton moved. That is not because your enemies became stronger, Solomon said. It is because your empire became heavier. Drayton's mandibles parted slightly. You are quoting restricted imperial logistics. I am quoting arithmetic. You stole imperial intelligence. Solomon looked almost tired. General, if Earth had stolen everything I needed, I would not have come personally. That was the moment Maretha's analysis engine finally classified him. Not as diplomat. Not as commander. Not as hostage. Catalyst. A person placed inside a system to reveal the pressure already breaking it. Drayton understood enough of it to grow still. Solomon continued before anger could rescue him. You do not need Earth to surrender. You need Earth to become simple. A flag lowered. A government signing. A species folded into the ledger. Then you can show your officers the method still works. You can show your colonies the machine is still hungry. You can show yourself that 400 was not the last clean number. Drayton said, careful. Solomon nodded. That is what I am asking you to be. No one spoke. Solomon turned the page. Earth's position is this. You withdraw beyond Neptune's outer surveillance perimeter. You announce nothing. We announce nothing. No treaty. No victory claim. No apology. No tribute. No hostage exchange. No public humiliation for your fleet. Drayton's eyes narrowed. That is not peace. That is evasion. Yes. Why would I accept evasion? Because you can survive it. The words did not rise. They dropped. Mareth saw several officers look at the fleet map, not Earth. Their own ships. Their own supply lines. Their own banners glowing above a table where silence had begun to feel like exposure. Drayton saw it too. Solomon closed the folder. If you attack, you may win the first hour. You may even win the first month. But every system you hold will watch you spend blood proving that an old ritual still frightens people who already answered it with a retired negotiator. Drayton said nothing. And if you do not win cleanly, Solomon added, then 400 civilizations learn the empire can be made to bleed by refusing the script. Mareth felt her pulse in her lower hands. That was the hidden weapon. Not a fleet waiting behind the moon. Not a secret doomsday engine. A story. If Earth fought and survived even briefly, the hegemony's past would become unstable. Every conquered species would look backward and wonder whether surrender had been inevitable or merely taught. The empire did not rule only by ships. It ruled by memory. Solomon was threatening the memory. Drayton's voice was low. And if I kill you now? Solomon folded the paper once. Then Earth sends the recording. The chamber froze. Vorik made a small involuntary sound. Maretha's console lit with sudden checks. Recording sweep. Signal isolation. Station archive status. Every system reported clean, then uncertain, then clean again. The uncertainty lasted less than a second. It was enough. Drayton did not look at the cameras. That was how Mareth knew Solomon had struck the right nerve. The general slowly turned his head toward the observation glass. Solomon waited until the movement finished. There it is, he said softly. Drayton looked back. What? The thing you actually fear. Solomon placed the folded paper beside the thermos. Not death. Not Earth. Not even defeat. He looked once at the conquest banners. Witnesses. For the first time, no one in the chamber looked away quickly enough. The withdrawal order began as a private channel transmission. No anthem carried it. No imperial proclamation softened it. On the fleet map above the negotiation table, one red vector blinked, reversed, and drew itself slowly away from Earth's gravity shadow. Then another. Then 12. Then all of them. Mareth watched the room discover retreat one ship at a time. Drayton did not announce it. He did not look toward his officers. He sat with both hands resting on the black table, claws still, eyes fixed on the folded paper beside Solomon's thermos as if it might move if he stopped watching. Solomon said nothing. That was the final cruelty. He did not thank the general for choosing peace. He did not demand signatures. He did not offer a victorious line for Earth's archives or a clean humiliation for the hegemony's enemies. He let the decision remain exactly what it was. A silence too expensive to explain. Vorik stood behind the observation glass, no longer trying to look composed. His young hands hovered at his sides, opening and closing as if searching for a weapon that would make the moment easier to understand. We are leaving, he said. Mareth heard the emptiness in his voice. Yes. But there is no treaty. No. No concession from Earth. No. No tribute. No. He turned toward her. Then what did we receive? Mareth did not answer because Drayton had not yet moved. Inside the chamber, the general finally looked up. Your planet will not announce victory, Drayton said. Solomon reached for his glasses and placed them carefully inside his folder. Earth will announce that negotiations concluded without incident. That is a lie. It is a mercy. Drayton's lower hand tightened. Do not dress contempt as mercy. Solomon closed the folder. I am not offering contempt. For the first time, something almost like exhaustion touched Drayton's face. What are you offering? Solomon looked at the conquest banners behind him, each one representing a world that had learned to survive by lowering its eyes. A way for you to leave without teaching everyone else how. The sentence sat between them. Drayton understood it before the officers did. That made the break visible. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. His armor did not shake. His voice did not fail. But one of his hands, the one closest to the folded paper, loosened by a fraction, and the sound his claws made against the table was almost gentle. Mareth saw it. The Empire inside him had reached for another threat and found only cost. Drayton lowered his gaze to the table. For 200 years, he had commanded rooms by making other species imagine consequences. Now he was sitting across from a man who had made him imagine the consequence of being seen. Solomon stood. No guard stopped him. He picked up his satchel, then his thermos. The steel cap clicked shut with a small final sound. He left the one-sentence paper on the table. Drayton noticed. Take it. Solomon paused at the door. No. Why? Because if you ever wonder whether Earth made an offer, I want the answer to stay where you can read it. Then he walked out. The chamber doors closed behind him with no ceremony. For several seconds, no one inside the observation deck spoke. Across the fleet display, the red formation continued to widen, pulling back from Earth until the planet was no longer trapped beneath a cage of light, only watched from a distance that looked, for the first time, like caution. Vorik swallowed. He threatened us with witnesses. Mareth corrected him quietly. No. He showed us we already had them. Vorik looked at the conquest banners. Mareth followed his gaze. 400 civilizations. 400 stories told the same way because the hegemony had controlled every ending. The Empire arrived. The Empire demanded. The Empire took. The conquered survived by believing resistance had been impossible. But Earth had done something more dangerous than resistance. It had made the Empire leave without giving it a clean story to tell. Somewhere in the archive below them, every camera file from the chamber now existed as a question no security officer would enjoy deleting. Too many systems had touched it. Too many eyes had watched the generals sit down, threaten, hesitate, and choose distance. Even if the hegemony buried the record, burial was not destruction. It was only another form of memory. Mareth knew that now. Solomon Voss had not beaten the Empire by exposing its weakness to Earth. He had made the Empire witness itself. Drayton emerged from the chamber several minutes later. No officer saluted too quickly. No one spoke too soon. The general walked past them toward the command lift, but Vorik stepped forward before discipline could stop him. Supreme General. Drayton stopped. Vorik's voice was careful, almost ashamed of its own need. What did he give us? Mareth turned from the display. The withdrawal vectors had crossed Neptune's perimeter. Earth remained untouched. No fires on the surface. No surrender beacon. No occupation code pulsing from orbit. Vorik looked at the general. We received nothing. Drayton was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was lower than command required. He gave us the chance to stop wondering what he was truly capable of. Vorik waited. Drayton looked once toward the sealed corridor where Solomon Voss had disappeared. We took it. No one challenged the sentence. No one needed to. Far below the retreating fleet, Earth turned in silence, blue and white under its own weather, carrying cities that would wake the next morning without ever knowing how close the sky had come to opening. Director Callum Osei received Solomon's final message 19 minutes after the fleet crossed the perimeter. No speech. No report. Just one line. They accepted the quiet. Osei read it alone, then closed the channel without replying. Some victories could not survive applause. Some warnings became weaker the moment they were explained. At the neutral station, maintenance lights dimmed over the empty chamber. The banners remained. The map remained. And beneath them, on the black table where empires usually collected signatures, one sheet of human paper stayed behind. Not signed. Not answered. Not removed.